What's up, you creepy fucks, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror Channel podcast, and welcome to the Creep Zone, where we have very honest, in-depth, unrated conversations about something from the world of horror. And this episode, I'm actually really excited about doing. I mean, excited about doing every episode. I don't know. It makes it sound like I'm fucking like I'm not excited about doing my show. I am. I'm very excited about doing it. But the reason is because this episode is I'm doing something that I've never done before, and that is we're going to be talking about a movie. Obviously, you know what the movie is. It's Smile, because you've obviously seen it in the title on YouTube, or you clicked on it on your Spotify or whatever. But you know what it is. We're talking about Smile. And I, before this, had never seen Smile. And I thought that, well, originally, me and my guest, who I'll introduce in a minute, we were originally going to be talking about a different movie. I'm not going to say what it was, but Disney, the absolute bastards, decided to take it off. And I'm cheap and I'm not paying to rent it or anything. So that film will come down the line once it's free again. But then I remembered the list that was sent over to me, as I always do. I always ask my guests to send me over a list of movies that they'd like to talk about. And Smile was on it. And I thought, you know what? It's a movie that passed me by. It passed me by for a reason, in a way. And it wasn't something that I necessarily rushed into going, do you know what? I need to watch this. And I'm going to talk about why. But I still had never seen it. 2 years later of it being released, I still had never seen it. And I thought, you know what? For the first time ever, why not talk about a movie that I've never seen before? And then this episode is essentially going to be very similar to like my reviews I do on YouTube, that if anybody see them, that I literally sit down and sort of talk everything out and get it all out of me and get it all off my chest. That's pretty much what this episode's going to be about, and I'm super excited about. And with me on this journey, that obviously she will never want to return again, because she's going to be like, what the fuck is going on? I've got Lindsay. Lindsay is the host of the Ghoulfriends podcast. Hello, Lindsay.
Hi.
Hello. So I said Lindsay is from the Ghoulfriends podcast, and as usual, if you want to know more, which you should want to know more, you will find out everything, where to find the podcast, everything that Lindsay does. She's going to tell you everything at the end. But we've already spoken a little bit about this. I think you said that you saw this at the cinema, didn't you?
Yeah, a couple of friends and I were going to a horror con in Manchester, and it was the night before the con, and it was like, what else is there to do but go to the cinema and watch a horror film? So Smile was on at the time, and we went to see it and really enjoyed it at the time anyway.
At the time, yeah. Well, we're going to get into it, because I think we spoke a little bit beforehand, and it's interesting to see, because obviously you saw it at the cinema, and obviously I didn't see this at the cinema. I literally saw it for the first time a couple days ago, and I actually watched it this morning as well, because I almost forgot some of it because my memory's so bad, because that's just what happens. Everybody knows by now. If you know the show, you know that I'm a moron. So Smile is what we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be getting into it now. Listen, like me, I had never seen this movie before, so if you haven't seen this movie, whether you're watching it or listening to it, obviously go and do that first, because there are going to be loads of spoilers. Normally I don't really say, oh, there's spoilers, because a lot of the time I'm talking about movies that are older and so on. This movie is still a pretty recent 2-year-old film, released in 2022. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you do, because I'm going to get right into the nitty gritty of everything about this movie. And I do warn everybody out there that if this is one of your favourite movies, then you might want to cover your ears or something, maybe. Yeah, I don't know how you'll take this episode, but it's going to be fun. So the film was released in 2022. It's directed by Parker Finn. It's starring now I always get names wrong. Sosie Bacon, probably wrong. I don't know. Is that right?
That's how I pronounce it. Yeah, Sosie.
Right.
Yeah.
We go with it. But that is who is obviously, you're like, oh, Bacon, Kevin Bacon's daughter. And once you know that, you do see the resemblance, especially when you watch this movie and you're like, there's a resemblance there. But he's also got a fan favourite of Kyle Gallner, who I once again can't pronounce his name. You've got Jesse T. Usher in this, who is A-Train, I think, in The Boys. Yeah, that's the program, Boys. You got Robin Weiger, that's definitely wrong. Caitlin Stasey, Cal Penn, Rob Morgan, Gillian Zinzer, Judy Reyes, and loads more people. There's loads. I'm not going through them all. I'm not wasting my time doing all of them, but there's loads of people.
I must
Um,
say, like,
on
I totally lost my mind at the cinema seeing Caitlin Stacey on this because I don't know if any other fellow millennials remember the Sleepover Club that used to be on CITV weekdays after school, and I was obsessed with that program. And she
oh,
played one of
she's
the
in it.
girls in that, yeah. And I was
Who is
just like,
she in
oh my
this?
god, it's Frankie from the Sleepover Club. She's Laura, the girl from the start of the film who's
Oh, okay. Because she's the one that's in the short movie that this is based on. That's right,
yes,
and they sort of bring
yeah.
her back. So, well, that's cool. But yeah, I've never seen that program. I'm not sure if I would. I'm sure my partner's seen it. But on IMDb, it's 6.5 and 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. So pretty decent. As we always say on here, if you get anything that's 6 above on IMDb, you're essentially an Oscar winner. Because they're pretty harsh. Google synopsis wise, after witnessing a bizarre traumatic incident involving a patient, Dr. Rose Cotter starts experiencing frightening occurrences that she can't explain. As an overwhelming terror begins taking over her life, Rose must confront her troubling past in order to survive and escape her horrifying new reality. I mean, to be fair, we could just end the episode there because they've done actually quite a good job for once. Um,
Yeah.
Normally, Google's an absolute shit, but they've done a pretty decent job there. So, where do we start with this movie? Because there's a lot, and one of the reasons why I'm really excited about talking about this movie is because there's a lot to talk about, and it's where do we start? So, well, let's start at the start because we are introduced to Sosie Bacon's character, obviously at the start of the movie. She's a mind doctor, I think. I think she's the doctor of the mind. And everything, seems to be like it's going all right in her life. She seems to enjoy her job. But then it's quite early on in the movie. In fact, it's even before we get the title screen that everything starts to go absolutely tits up,
I
and
think
it
it's
goes pretty mental.
interesting that you've used that phrase, though, that like everything seems to be going well in her life, because I feel like maybe it's easier on the second watch, but it's like if you look closely, it's like how obsessed she is with work, how willing she is to miss out on familial events and events with her partner. The way she's just kind of like isolated and obsessed with work, for me, raises like red flags about this person perhaps being traumatized, perhaps having like mental health issues, because I feel like when people center work in their life sometimes, or like avoid friends, avoid family, it's like, okay, what are you trying to avoid? And as much as the events that occur that spark off what happens to Rose, and the events of the film, I feel like there is a bit of an idea of this breakdown that Rose has over the course of the film kind of being inevitable as well, because as much as it's her job to help people, which she does 80 hours a week, that's not sustainable. She doesn't really do anything to help herself or let other people help her either. So I think there's something about her and about what happens to her that kind of feels inevitable, and it just so happens that it's this demon thing that nobody believes her about. But she was destined for this breakdown. It's just the way it happens is very unexpected.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm happy that you've already said that because I already know that you're going to be a lot cleverer at understanding the film than I am. But so at least you're going to bring some form of intelligence to this. But yeah, it's interesting the way that the movie starts. We're first, as I said, introduced to sort of Sosie Bacon and where she is at work. Like I said, she's a mind doctor. And then I think how can I be so bad at memory even though I watched it already? But the first one we're introduced to is some guy who's ruffled at the feathers, so to speak. I think it's this guy, isn't it? And he turns up and he's saying these things constantly. Quite clearly, he's having a lot of stress, anxiety, a lot of mental health problems that we obviously at that point don't know and we aren't supposed to know. But it is already making you intrigued as to where the movie could go or what route this movie is going to take. Because obviously going into this, I didn't really know much about it, and I sort of purposely tried to make it that way. That way, when it comes a time and that I actually watch it, I'll try and know as little as possible. But we're introduced to this guy who's clearly, got a lot of trouble, and she's trying to do what she can as a doctor to help him. But then the second person we're introduced to is Caitlin Stacey. I get everything wrong. And her situation is even worse. And this is where the movie really does kick off, because this is at the point that you realise that this isn't going to be a nice movie. It's not going to be a nice movie, and we get basically that she comes into this room where she's saying that she is seeing this thing that is following her, that he's telling, that is essentially trying to kill her. No one else can see it apart from her, and she can only see the forms that it's taking. And then within that meeting that they're having in a brief short amount of time, she ends up basically slitting her throat. She puts on obviously this smile that's is known with this movie now, and obviously with the marketing campaign, and now with Smile 2 as well. It's pretty, that smile sort of becoming very iconic within horror as well. And then she does a horrible thing to herself, and that's the start of the movie. And already we're sort of pretty far into it already, with in regards to things happening already. You're like, oh, okay, well, this is a good start.
Yeah, like seeing that for the first time, like it's so violent, and it's interesting as well because obviously you do kind of get the, I'll watch everything with subtitles, so it's like ominous music, in the
Yeah,
brackets, so something's going to happen. But it's the silence when the thing takes over and the person does the eerie smile, and that's what's like most like eerie about the whole thing. Like Rose has got her back to the person, and she's on the phone like, I need help, like I need this, I need that, and then you expect to be hearing like someone kicking off, like throwing chairs or maybe throwing themselves against a wall or something, but there's nothing. And
yeah,
that's like the scariest part about it, is like what's she doing behind her, which there's just completely silent. And then this violent act this poor woman does to herself is so shocking, and she's looking Rose right in her eyeballs while she's doing it, and it's so unsettling. I think that whole part was like really well done. And I think, well, obviously this film is like ruminations on trauma and how it affects other people, and I guess like in some ways, if you wanted to criticize that, it is bastering you over the head almost, like this is what happens when you see
yeah.
traumatic things. But I do think it does it really well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's like, it's one of those things when if people say that, at the same time, my response is the same response as what I give to quite a few people, and that is it's a movie. So they've got to try and fit what they can in regards to telling you the story and the emotions of what the movie is within the confines of that runtime of the movie, which is obviously something I'll talk about later about the runtime of this movie. But that's the thing. So you're right to say that that's one of those things that where people are like, oh, it's sort of batting it on the head and saying like this is going to be about this and this is trauma and this is what happens and so on. But at the same time, it's like, and the message of this movie is very clear. It's not. It doesn't really like hide it. It wears it sort of on its sleeve. But I think the way that it does it, it's doing that on purpose. Like that's deliberate. And I quite like that. But that scene as well, and I mean, even just off the bat, there's loads of things to get into, and that's why obviously I'm not going to go into the entirety of the movie and everything that happens, because the start really sets up quite a lot in regards to what you're going to get from this movie, and that's why I think it's a very interesting start. But to go back to when she's doing this thing to herself and with the smile and she cuts herself and so on, what is interesting to me is that it's whenever you see these people smiling, you can still see the pain behind their eyes, and you can still see that like there's so much torture that they're going through mentally and also physically, because obviously they can't stop themselves from doing it, that when she's doing, you know, what she's doing, you can still see the pain behind her eyes as she's doing it. And then that is also, like you said earlier, like the scene's unsettling, and that is quite unsettling because there's nothing she can do. You know, this entity, this monster thing is, you know, this thing is now in control. There's nothing she can do. You know, that's the end of her, and you can see all of that in her face, and you see that throughout the movie with these people that have the smile and so on. There's nothing they can do, and that is unsettling, and it's quite uncomfortable, because then you start thinking about yourself. You know, when horrors work best is when they're making you think. And this movie, like when things like that happen in the movie, you're like, I don't want to be in that situation. So hopefully I'm not, you know, and that's it. So that's a good start. But I think one of the really good things that is one of the driving forces for me to talk about in the movie is, as soon as this movie starts, you know that you're going to be on a visual journey, technically in regards on a filmmaking standpoint. So Parker Finn obviously directed this movie, but you can tell that he's a very technical filmmaker, and everything that he does is very purposeful in this movie. From every camera shot, every camera angle, from the colors. So we start off with the movie, and Rose is essentially surrounded by rose colors, and she's wearing blue, which is where she wears blue throughout the movie, which is signaling that there is a sadness to her, because obviously we all know that blue is, you know, a sad color. Depends. A lot of people like blue, but she's, you know, a lot of the scenery, and throughout the movie the colors change. And the more the movie goes on, deliberately the movie gets darker, not just in tone, but in regards to the aesthetics. So that already, for me, once again, everybody knows, you know, filmmaking side of it is something that's very important to me, and that to me was already interesting. I'm sure that's, you noticed that as well. You know, I'm sure you did.
Yeah, definitely. And I love it when people use color to reflect what's happening on the inside with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah, I mean, we recently sort of got it in Take to Me, not Take to Me, Talk to Me. We recently got that as well, where Mia is always wearing like a yellow at the start. And
Yeah.
obviously I did an episode about that, and I was talking about what the yellow color obviously means and what it can mean. There's multiple different sort of ways you can look at the color yellow and its meaning and so on, just from a cardigan. But throughout that movie, the colors become lesser and lesser, and it's about her mental state. And that's very similar to this movie, where it becomes about, the further we go into the trauma, you know, and the mental health, you know, how it affected mental health and the trauma, and how dealing with it, and how, you know, she gets worse and worse, and her condition gets worse and worse through it. So does the condition, so to speak, of the movie itself. And that is interesting to me, because it means that it's not just a point and shoot movie. There's actual thought behind it. It's very Kubrick, so to speak, where everything is meticulous. Sometimes I think it might be a little bit pretentious or meticulous, because sometimes you're doing shots that don't need to be shots that are upside down and stuff like that. But everything sort of has a reason, so to speak. But so yeah, so as soon as this happens, and obviously we get the title card, a smile, and comes up on the screen, this is where it starts to really go downhill. For what's I keep on calling her Sosie Bacon, but I can't even remember her name in the movie. What's
Rose.
Rose? I've already just said it. I've literally
Yeah.
just said it as well. What's wrong with me? But so with Rose, this is where it really starts. We go to Rose's home, where she has her partner that she's with. She's got a cat called
Mustache.
Mustache. That's it. Fucking hell, I can't remember anything. And then you've got a cat called Mustache. As soon as you see the cat, you know it's going to die. It's so sad, but it always happens. If
Yeah.
stop having pets in movies because they're always going to die and make everybody sad. But what's cool, and I'll get into that in a bit, but we don't really know how that's going to happen. We probably know it's going to happen, but how does it get there in in an absolutely fucking mental scene? So we introduced obviously to a partner, to a house, the world she almost the way that she has her interactions with her partner in it as well. It's difficult to know whether he's quite controlling, or whether because he understand or knows of her past trauma and so on, whether he doesn't necessarily know how to be around her, or she doesn't necessarily know how to be around him sometimes. Am I looking too much into that, or is that?
No, I really don't think you are. Like, these things can be really tricky in relationships, and I think so. I've had friends who have been like full disclosure about things, and then it's been used to manipulate them. And oh, you don't understand these things because X, Y, and Z has happened to you. So no, you absolutely could be onto something. Like, they do certainly have a frayed relationship, whether it is him being controlling, like him being off with her being off with him. She's also working like 80-hour weeks, so it's like, how much
Yeah,
time are these people really spending together? She works this really stressful job. We don't know what he does, but she's working with these traumatized people like every day. That's gonna weigh on you. Like, you're gonna get burnout, you're gonna get compassion fatigue. So when you come home and if your partner's having a really shit day, it's like, well, I saw someone kill themselves today, and how can you compete with that, really? Like,
yeah,
if you just work in an office, you know what I
yeah.
mean? So these things are gonna weigh heavily on a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's like moments where she sort of catches herself, like and she even says it about venting and so on like that. But then she realizes, like, it's almost as if she's trying to keep it out the home, and that possibly might be one of the reasons as to why she's working 80 hours a week, weekday, so on, because she goes home and then it's still there. She can't leave it at work. She brings it home, and I think that she's obviously trying to make a conscious effort for that not to be something that puts a strain on the relationship, that feels like to me it probably has done in the past, with especially where they are in their relationship within the movie. Also, once again, they've got to stop making people fucking rich in movies because it's easy. It does my head in. Like, everybody's always got money, and it does my head in because you're like, it's an easy way of doing stuff. Like, when it comes to movies and stuff, they're like, let's just go and get a nice house rather than try and make something look like a piece of shit.
Yeah,
And obviously
like,
we get that in the end, but
this watch through of it, like, one of the points where she's like having a bit of a like tiff with her sister, she's like, oh, why are you working for basically no money? And I'm just like, they live in a really nice house in the middle of nowhere. So either
yeah,
he's really rich,
yeah.
or like she is actually making a lot of money, and they've both put like a good amount of
Yeah.
money
Well,
into
I
this
think, I
house,
mean,
because it's not a shitty house. Like, it's a
no,
nice
it's not.
house.
It's a nice house, and I think I can't remember. I mean, I could have heard completely wrong, but I think that he might have even said that she was voluntary. So, um, when they're having the dinner, when it gets very awkward, I can't remember if she's. I know that he turns around and says she loves her job, so she's doing it for free, or might be voluntary.
He
It could be
said that
wrong.
she loves it so much she would do it for free.
Ah,
But
okay,
I
right.
think
Well,
there is a comment made about her not being paid for overtime or all this extra work that she does. So she's
yeah.
definitely not getting paid like accordingly. And I don't know if it's implied it's like a free clinic or something as well. But
Yeah, yeah, because
yeah,
people just walk in willy nilly in their dirty clothes. But so yeah, so already, like I said at the start of the movie, we're introduced to Rose, and already you get one, she's seen these odd, incredibly traumatic things that would affect anyone, but she's already got this incredibly traumatic backstory, which this is essentially almost reigniting that sort of like mental health, anxiety, this trauma within her, and that's obviously going to be the basis of what happens in the movie as it goes forwards. Things that obviously like happen in the movie. So obviously we know that the cat's going to die, and we we get a scene in the movie where it is her sister's son's birthday party, and basically, unfortunately, unfortunately, the cat is in the box, and everything goes pretty absolutely mental in a scene that um, is very unpredictable, and that's what I absolutely love about this scene. I'm trying not to go into that scene so much now because I know that I'm going to talk about it later. But is that a standout scene for you?
Absolutely. Like, I remember watching it at the cinema for the first time and really like trying to anticipate like what's gonna happen. And it was one of those things, like as soon as that wee boy just kinda his face dropped and they were just like, oh no, it's the fucking cat in it.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
the way that she's like cradling it like a baby, the way she's like screaming and she's like desperate for someone to help her and nobody's helping her because they are horrified for a different reason than she is,
Yeah,
and the way everybody's just looking at her and stuff, and you're just like, I feel so sorry for Rose in that moment because if you take it as like a metaphor for her having a mental breakdown, like she's there like screaming for help and nobody knows what to
no
do
one's helping.
and nobody can help her, and then because they're so outraged at what they perceive she's done, nobody will help her either, and it's just all so like helpless and hopeless, and then she's covered in her own blood in the end, and the way she's screaming, it's just I my heart breaks for her in that scene,
Yeah.
and I obviously feel sorry for the wee boy as well that's
Well, that's
found
what I
that.
was going to say as well, because what is interesting about that scene as well, once that you sort of like have got through that scene and then you think about it yourself, it's interesting how that sort of is almost very similar to, obviously not in regards to circumstance, but it's very similar, so to speak, of Rose's story, because obviously she had all this trauma from when she was young, and now this kid, they obviously they don't talk about it for the rest of the movie, but this kid is now going to have that trauma for the rest of his life, worrying about every birthday and every box as he opens, is it going to be a cat in there? And that's what's interesting as well, because it becomes about all the layers of where the movie, how Rose's actions or the things that are happening to Rose, they're still affecting other people around her and creating trauma. So it's almost as if every footstep that she's making, it's creating like a family tree of trauma that it's
Yeah,
constantly branching out to everyone she goes to. And I find that obviously interesting as well, because it just means that wherever you go with this movie, it makes it a little bit more unpredictable, well, in those moments. But there is obviously there are quite a bit of predictable moments in this movie, because it goes from, it doesn't do enough of those moments for me, and I'll get into that anyway and so on. But that's pretty much the first main sort of instance of, apart from obviously what happens at the start, that is obviously a really traumatic thing for Rose. And then I think from that point onwards, that's where it starts really ramping up and so on like that. One of the things that I do, but I find really weird as well in this movie, because one of the other characters that is in the movie, played by Carl Garner, is her ex-boyfriend, who's a cop, and he's always around, sort of trying to sort of check up on her, look after her. Obviously, for me, it's a case that he probably knows more than everybody else, because he was obviously with her before, her current boyfriend in the movie, and he probably knows more about it, and that might have been the case that they're not together because she pushed him away, and it could have been a case that he couldn't handle it, or she didn't want him involved in it anymore. So there's a lot of layers to where the characters are or where they have been in this movie, and I find that really interesting. It basically comes down to good filmmaking and good structure and good character structure and so on. But I find it's quite funny that the Mind Doctor, I know I get the fact that she obviously has dealt with trauma and some very, very bad things, but I feel that the way that she goes from like point one of this happening to absolutely batshit crazy, I find that's too quick within the confines of the movie for me, and that sort of frustrates me. I know that because obviously at the end of the day, if you're a psychiatrist, you're a mind map person, whatever you are, that you are conditioned, you are trained, to control yourself, to build up your own mechanisms, so you can then treat and help other people build up their own coping mechanisms and deal with their own trauma and mental health. And although obviously seeing everything that she did would have obviously brought back trauma and so on like that, I feel that someone in her position, like if she wasn't a brain person, then I feel that it's more feasible that she wouldn't be able to handle it better. But I feel that her transition from sort of normal to start raving bonkers, I feel that transition in the movie is done too quick, if that makes sense.
I hear what you're saying, but I think the actual point of that is her coping strategies aren't actually in place. Like
Yeah,
we see in the film that she's like massively overworked. She's working 80 hours a day. So she's overworked, overtired. We never see her interact with a friend. Her relationship with her boyfriend is frayed. Her relationship with her sister is strained. So she can't talk to them. There's no one that she can talk to about the things that she's going through day to day. We see in the film as well that she calls her therapist, who she's not been seeing regularly. It's someone who she used to see and then decided to stop seeing. So actually, I don't think her coping strategies and her mechanisms were in place at all. I think she was using work to mask a lot of
yeah, you're
the
right.
hurt that she was going through. So you're right. You would expect her to maybe have some things in place because this is her job, and I think she's possibly guilty of. And I know I can be like this sometimes with my own mental health, like trying to understand it so much as a way to keep on top of it, but actually
Yeah,
not putting things in place to deal with it. And it's
yeah,
like, oh yeah, I understand why I'm depressed, but I don't do anything about it.
yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
The
I
more,
think
and that's
that's
what.
why she just goes off this cliff edge so easily.
Yeah, I think you're right. The more, and it's interesting, and that's why I love having these conversations, because as I'm saying it, I'm sort of thinking about it, and then you're saying what you're saying, and then I get it. It's just it becomes sometimes for me it's difficult to go, this is the movie and this is where it's going, and then separating the character of their journey and so on, because sometimes obviously when they make movies they just say, well, it's got to go from here to here to here, we've got to get there somehow, so we rush it. And that's how I sort of felt. But then talking about yeah, you're right. It means the problem is she believes that she's creating these coping mechanisms that aren't there, and she thinks that she can control her own mind and so on, which she quite clearly can't. Which obviously once again makes the character even sadder, and it makes it more of a difficult thing to think about or watch and so on. Because like I said, this movie, what I do like about it is that it doesn't shy away of going, this is going to be about mental health, this is going to be about trauma. And even though ultimately, yes, it does become about more than that, the main basis of about the movie is about, I know it sort of feels like it's like they're almost saying, sort help yourself, because trauma can do this without this demon monster thing in life. But once again, that could end up being a metaphor for so much more as well. And obviously, there's a lot of people out there that don't potentially even believe that that could be a real manifestation of a real thing. It could just be a manifestation of her trauma and so on, and how it pushes her to the limit. Obviously, feasibly, that doesn't really make sense because all the other people are doing these things and so on. So I don't think it makes sense for it to not be a real thing. But obviously, trauma is real. I just think that the entity at the end obviously sort of has to be a sort of real supernatural element to the movie. Um, but yeah, but it's so we're taking on this journey with Sosie Bacon, as I said, with Rose. I did it again. I forgot her name. And it is a really interesting one, and a lot of really bad things happen. But for me, it's an interesting one because so this is a long movie, and I think we are at this age in horror now where a rite of passage to a horror movie now seems to be that you have to be and I'll get into this more later as well, but you have to be like a 2 hour plus movie for it to be considered a horror movie anymore. And I don't like that when it doesn't work. And this is where I get into some of my problems with Smile, is that I do think it's too long, and I do think there are scenes, like I said at the start, this film on a cinematography and a technical level, everything is purposeful. So when a shot is lingering, it's doing that on purpose. It's doing it to create uneasiness, and and a sort of like the way that every shot is set up. So it's a big wide angle, and there's so much space, and there's so many shots where they're trying to give you, where Rose is so small in the shot because it's almost feels like it's a depiction of how she feels in those moments. And it's an interesting way of obviously filmmaking. But the problem is that there's a lot of that they could have taken out to reduce the runtime, because what happens is the longer the movie, this is a slow paced movie, and what happens is sometimes that because it only has the moments of unpredictability, and then it goes back to being almost like a family drama, and then when it's outside of those moments, that's when it works. But when it's back into this like formulaic movie, it then makes those scenes too long, and you're like, oh, okay, just hurry up, because I don't want to sit here and watch another 2 hour movie when you could have been like constantly on the pace. And rather than necessarily creating that feeling of uneasiness, you could have created an urgency and an energy to the movie that could have given you like this crazy adrenaline of the movie, of you going, well, like, for me, that's more anxiety inducing, and I feel like that would have been a better approach to the movie than making it way too long.
Yeah, I think that's like one of my criticisms of the film, because it comes in just under 2 hours. It's an hour and
Yeah,
55, but it feels a lot longer.
yeah,
And I think in the cinema, like, I hadn't seen it, so I was quite happy to just kind of like watch the story unfurl. But then when I was rewatching it for this, I was kind of like looking at my watch, like,
yeah,
hurry up,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
because
You do get
I
that.
already knew what the beats were, and I was like, right, fucking come on, hurry up, like, let's get to the next part. And I do
Yeah,
feel like perhaps, well, I don't know, maybe I'll disagree, but I'm trying to think, what would you cut? Like, I was thinking perhaps the scene that I love Julia. Is it Julia Reyes? Carla from Scrubs. Um,
yeah,
I love her, but I don't
yeah,
know. I feel like the film still makes sense without that,
yeah.
because her
There's a lot of
and Joel are still going to look at all the police stuff, and we still
yeah,
get from A to B without that, and you could
yeah.
take it out.
What's really interesting is that I really agree with you, because I loved seeing her in the movie, because I'm a massive fan of Scrubs, and seeing her like go, like being able to be in a big movie, a movie obviously we talk about it that made a lot of money on the big screen, seeing her in it, and she's fucking brilliant in that scene that she's in. And I will say something about, because obviously performances is something really big, that on the show that I talk about, and there's a lot of opinions that probably people won't like that I'm going to say about the performances in this movie. But Judy Reyes, seeing her in it and then getting her chance to sort of shine outside of something like Scrubs, but feel like she's so different. That was a really cool like thing to see her being really good. But also at the same time, I do agree with you. Like, it's another scene. Like, I feel like there's multiples of scenes that with her boyfriend or with her ex where they could have shortened, where they could have taken it out, and it then becomes the modern day horror that we seem to always get, and studios feel like we have to have now. And unfortunately, the truth is that we don't always have to have every single movie that's 2 hours long, especially movies that are like this. I always say, like I said at the start, like this film feels very, in regards to on a technical standpoint, it feels very Kubrick. Very like The Shining, so to speak. But the thing that The Shining is a long movie as well. But the reason why The Shining, for me personally, doesn't feel like this, and like you're sort of waiting things to hurry along, is because the constant unpredictability of The Shining, where you're like, I have no idea. Obviously, once you've seen it, you know what's happening. But when you see it for the first time, you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Like, where are we going to go next? Like, it's so unpredictable, and things are constantly happening in The Shining. And then even recently, Terrifier 3 and Terrifier 2, both very long movies, but something is constantly happening. If you're not with Sienna, in her story, like take Terrifier 3, for example, if you're not with Sienna, then you're with Art the Clown doing the things, then you're back and forth, back and forth. Whereas these movies, like Smile and some of the other movies I'll reference in a bit, they are the modern day horrors, where they're very slow in pace, and sometimes what happens is when they're so slow in pace, they sort of lose, or you as a viewer sort of lose where you are within it, and you're sort of like, well, we just want to get to the next bit, because you should be, as a movie, trying to keep that constant unpredictability, because horror works at its best as unpredictable, and it's so difficult to do that. And we get that throughout the movie with like that scene where everything is happening with the cat and so on, and that scene feels very unpredictable, because you sort of, like you said, that when the box opens, the cat's going to be in there, and you know that's going to fucking suck. But how that unfolds, when I watched it at the end of that scene, I was like, oh, okay, like I didn't expect that. And you get that quite often throughout the movie, but it's only in moments. And I don't think that it's right to expect that in every moment, but it's always the bits in between where you're like, okay, I've seen this, so let's get to the next bit.
Yeah, like you definitely do need some of those slower moments to establish like relationships and atmosphere. Sometimes character moments that come out of it. But yeah, I feel like we got a really good understanding of who Rose Cotter is like very early on. And the whole film is following her because it's her story. There's no B plot. There's just Rose. So unless it's something knew about the sister, knew about the boyfriend, knew about Joel, then it could have been there could have been a wee bit of faction. But I do feel like I do like still really enjoy this film, and I feel like it's perhaps me being a bit nitpicky. Even the
Yeah,
scene with Julia Reyes, it's a great
yeah,
sequence.
good thing.
But if I wanted to be nitpicky, there is a wee bit of fat that could have been trimmed, and
Yeah,
those scenes are that for me.
yeah, you're right. And so I said about performances, and this is where I might piss people off, but it is what it is. But basically, I so Sosie Bacon in this movie is fantastic. She's very, very good. She handles dealing with trauma, whether it's past trauma, whether it's current trauma in the movie. She deals with that very, very well. She's a very good actress, and she's a very good, there's a big difference between the different styles of acting: movie acting, theatre, stage acting, and TV acting. There's very different versions of it. Judy Reyes, like I said, was very, very good, but I found it very difficult with every single other performance in this movie, because it felt very much like a stage play, where it was like, and this person enters from the left, or this person enters from the right, meet these new characters that are going to mean nothing. And it was a really weird, because it didn't suit the movie. I feel that the film was going, apart from obviously everything that happens at the end, trauma is real, mental health issues is real, and it was really weird to feel. I felt like all the performances were so off kilter. I felt that they weren't movie performances; they were stage performances, and the way that they were performed. So, like, one of the things that I didn't like. So I don't. It was the person that plays her boyfriend in this. I couldn't stand his performance in it. Everything he said, or the way that he said it didn't feel right to the tone of the scene that it was happening at that time. And I didn't like it whatsoever. Like the way he would say things, it was all very like every single type scene he was in, it was always one tone. It was never really anything else. Her sister and her sister's boyfriend, I couldn't stand them as characters because it didn't suit the movie because it was uh, they weren't people, they were characters, and there's a huge difference in that in a movie. If you're For me, if I'm in something, if I'm in, whatever I'm doing, I'm playing a person, and I'm not playing a character. And in this movie, the actors that are in it, they're playing characters, and that's very apparent on the screen. So I found that very difficult to go over. That's not going to be everyone. That's because obviously, with acting and so on, like that's one of, as everybody knows on this, on the podcast, and that performance is a huge, huge thing to me because obviously it's one of, apart from the people making the movie, obviously they're on the screen, we're watching it. They are one of, if not the biggest driving force of the movie. And if you get something like this that sort of takes you out of it, then that can have a really bad sort of negative impact on the movie. So, like I said, it might piss people off, but I don't like the performances in the movie, which was surprising because I expected them to be really good in a film about the topic that it is, or feel more grounded and real. But it just felt like you were like on a stage and they would just had a camera set up. But that's just me. You probably think the absolute opposite.
No, I do kind of get what you mean. Like Rose's boyfriend is like a bit standoffish, and we don't really get to know him particularly well. But again, I'm not sure if that's maybe like a poor performance or if it was in the writing that because
Yeah,
I don't really feel like a big connection between the two of those, considering they're like
no,
engaged to be married. You think, you know, you would get like love vibes from them, and you really don't. And I think again with like Rose's sister and her husband, like yeah, they're very much like a trope of like a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
who are maybe a bit vain, and they like nice things, and she's saying to Rose like, oh, why don't you go private practice, you'll make so much money, and not really thinking about how Rose might just want to do it because she's contributing to society and it makes her feel good, and being on the ground like doing what she does, she enjoys it and it makes her feel good rather than just thinking about how much money you can make out
yeah.
of it. I mean, I don't think you should be a doctor for the money anyway. I think you
No,
should
no.
want to heal people, but it's very much like a trope, and to the point where like I can't remember the sister and her husband's name.
Oh
Um,
no,
yeah.
absolutely not.
So I do kind of get how you would not have great feelings towards those characters. I'm not an actor, so can't really say that I thought their performances were bad, but I definitely understand why people would maybe think those characters were like forgettable or like not really
Yeah.
like them very much.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and that's why I said, like at the start, like this is the type of movie that I really like talking about because this isn't like, obviously I'm not going to say anything now, but say for example if this was a movie that I really didn't like, and but I still will always have like a constructive side to look at it from different aspects. Everybody has said, anybody that knows a show knows that in my head when I watch the movies I have tick boxes, and it's like the performances and the cinematography and so on like that, and I'm trying to tick the boxes as it goes along, and it was really frustrating to me, and like I said, where it did feel like it could have just been on a stage and then they were doing it, and it felt like the emphasis of creating a person was solely on Rose and not necessarily worrying about what they do with the other characters or the other people in the movie, and they sort of got these heightened performances out of them that don't feel like real people.
Mm.
And but then at the same time, because everything in this movie is so purposeful and so meticulous, is that on purpose? And that's the other side of looking at it. And that's what's also interesting because you're like, I'm just somebody who does a shitty little podcast that I don't know. Whereas obviously Parker Finn, he's the person that will know. And I find once again on a filmmaking aspect, then you're like, well, that makes it interesting as well because maybe the sole purpose is that the fact that Rose is supposed to be the only real person in it. Even Cole Gallner, that was weird. Cole Gallner, for anybody out there, if you know who he is, you know that normally he gives really fantastic performances, but he's also like really out there a lot of the time, like in regards to like he's always like quite hot headed, always got a temper, uh, you know, always quite aggressive and so on. In this, he's the opposite of that. He's like a very standard character, and that was a shame that Cole Gowner was almost a standard character. And also, he's like supposed to be. I mean, he's a cop. He's like the most logical person, like one of the most logical people in the movie. But yeah, he's the one that believes all this shit that's going on, and that made me laugh a bit.
See, the first time I watched this film, I was clearly getting like very swept up on it because I was like rooting for Rose and Joel. I wanted them to get
Yeah,
together in the end because, well, certainly that time I watched it, I was like, I felt the chemistry between them. But I do think you're maybe like onto something with like maybe the performances being purposeful because again, I think it shows Rose's lack of connections with the people closest to her, which then would lead to her to descend into such a bad mental health period that she actually like those connections are so important. Like community and talking to people and having support networks are so important for good mental health. And I think maybe all these standoffish people around her, all these people that she can't connect with, therefore we can't connect to them, I think
yeah,
actually was maybe done on purpose to show that Rose is completely alone, even though she has family around her and a boyfriend around her. You know, she's actually very alone and doesn't have a good support network.
yeah. And what's frustrating, right, is knowing that if at any point in life Parker Finn ever sees this, he's going to go, "Yep, it was purposeful." It probably wasn't, but he's just going to go, "Yep, they got it. It's purposeful. They're right." And he'd get home to his wife and be like, "Oh, like or whoever," and be like, "Oh, I didn't even like that was no intention, but they fucking solved it." So that's another string to his bow. But yeah, so that's it. But and that
Maybe.
happens all the time. I'm convinced it happens every time I talk about something on the show. Somebody's just like, "Yeah, that's it." So there we go, Parker Finn. You can have that one. But yeah, you're right, and it's an interesting and that's to be fair, like that's a part of good filmmaking as well. Is that what we're talking about, or what I've been talking about, could be absolute bullshit, but if you don't if a movie doesn't make you think, it's not doing its job properly. So even though that could be absolute fucking shit, and I'm once again doing what I always do, which is overthinking things and looking way too much into everything, if you aren't interested in a movie or where it's going, you're not going to think of those things, and that is a sign of a good movie. So no matter what I've said so far or what I probably am going to say about the movie, um, it has that, and that's a good thing, because obviously there's so much shit that we watch that you don't ever want to think about again. I literally watched a movie the other day called Asriel, and if I never watch that again, I'll be pretty happy. um but so, and I don't even remember pretty much anything that happens in that movie already. So it's already had the opposite effect of what this movie has had on me. So that's what's once again is so interesting about movies, is that you start having a conversation like this where you're trying to figure things out that might not even be the absolute case whatsoever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like I could be just like rewriting history for this film,
yeah,
and like, or like, and actually, yeah, that is like totally it. Or you could be right, and maybe the performances weren't up to scratch, but
yeah, maybe they're just
that
shit.
is the fun thing about films. Like we can talk about these things and maybe be like, oh, they're talking about this, they're talking about that, because you know, as much as it's like a horror film about this demon that follows people around and makes them commit suicide in front of other people, like it's talking about trauma and generational trauma and how you deal with your mental health is and so important for how you interact with the world around you, and that's a really important story to tell. And there's so many important stories being told through horror films that your typical like dramas will not touch with a barge pole. So yeah, like conversations like this are really important, and films like this being made to inspire those conversations is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But yet we know that it never gets looked upon generously because it's a horror movie, and that's the fucking
Exactly.
of Hollywood and this corrupt fucking bollocks Hollywood shit that doesn't give a shit about horror, even though it is one of the biggest depictions in any genre of any form of mental health, trauma. I mean, you look at almost any horror movie and it deals with trauma, and it deals with trauma on so many different levels, but yet is never recognized for doing that. So it's good, I suppose, when a movie like this, because obviously this was a big hit when it came out. And obviously, like I've mentioned, we literally, I mean, this is, it would have basically, the sequel of this movie would have come out in the cinemas last month by the time everybody sees this. And I'm sure that's, going to be a big success as well, because this movie was. Now, I'm going to fast forward to the end. So basically, everything's gone tits up. Carl Gallner, even though he's supposed to be a logical cop, he's fully on board with it. He knows that all this shit is happening. He knows it's real. So basically, Rose goes back to her childhood home, where essentially, I think it is her childhood home, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
earlier on, they're like, "Oh, you've got to sell it," and she's like, "No, I mean, I'd sell it. It looks like a shithole." But she, but yeah. So she goes back to this place with childhood trauma and so on, and this is where we really come face to face with one of obviously the big talking points that was out there a lot with this movie, and that is the entity or whatever it is, and basically it is an absolute giant monstrosity, very similar to start off with, like the thing that we get in Barbarian. I don't know. Well, obviously you would have seen Barbarian, but very similar to that big tall thing, like. Well, I don't know, lady monster thing in Barbarian. Obviously, this is more of a supernatural being, so to speak. And then it rips its face off, uh, and then uh, and then basically it is consuming and going inside of Rose. Nearly forgot her name again. Goes inside of Rose, and then Rose is taken over and then that is essentially when we know that's the end of Rose. And she sets herself on fire, which is never a nice thing, and that's obviously an excruciating way to go. And then Carl Garner is left there. Essentially, seems to be the fact that is going to be him going forward, because as we know in the movie, once you see it, then that's it. Um, so when it comes to the end of the movie, what I'd like to ask you is, do you like the end of the movie? Do you like the fact that it is a real? It's not just trauma, manifesting to something that she's believing it to be. Do you like the fact that it is a physical entity that we get to see that is part of it? Do you like that?
Um, I don't know. It's a funny one because it's like obviously her mother like looms very heavy for her, so it kind of makes sense that her mother and the guilt that she feels about her mother's death, and it makes sense that looms so heavy for her. And that it's this giant thing that follows her around the house because it's this giant thing that's been following her around since she was 10 years old. And I kind of like the way that it's, well, obviously it goes into her mouth, but it's that way. It's like, if you don't deal with this shit, it will eat you up for the rest of
Yeah,
your life. But I am very interested, and maybe the second one will answer this. Like, is it a big giant thing to everyone?
yeah.
Um, or is
Is it how
has
they perceive it?
yeah, or has she, like, this is how she views her guilt and her mother and everything that happened to her as a child and how it's followed her around, and then she can see it for what it is, and then it's gone inside her. Is this just how she sees it, or will we see this in Smile too as well? That's what I'm
Yeah.
curious about.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, I'm interested about that as well. Is whether it is a real physical manifestation of trauma in the way that she sees it, um, and is these all these faces that are part of this body and so on like that. are these all faces of the people that she feels that she has let down or hurt and so on like that through her trauma, but then the other side of that is then, like I said earlier on, you're like, but part surely then you start thinking about, then it sort of has to be a physical manifestation of something like a supernatural, because obviously other people are seeing it. So there's, and also they're sort of mentioning the same things as, like we said earlier on, when we get to that scene with Judy Reyes, where she's talking about it and all the drawings and so on. That person has seen the manifestation of what it was, and so on. So then you start to then question yourself, because you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's not a manifestation of her trauma, and this is, like you say, like it's eating her alive, which is a very clever way of doing it. But at the same time, you're, in my mind, I'm like, but it can't physically be that, because other people are seeing it. So it has to be a real supernatural entity that's making people feel like this to do this. And that's interesting, because once again, it becomes about topic and conversation about it. Like, why are other people, if it is just a manifestation of what she sees, or, for example, well, no, because now I'm thinking of it, see, it doesn't make sense to me, and I'll get so confused.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, does it look the same to everyone? It's like,
Yeah,
has it presented itself to Rose like this? But what did it look like to Laura? Like, and we see with Julia Reyes' husband's character, like, it looked a bit different there as well. It's like, does it look different to every single person? I wonder if we'll, like, how many times we'll see it in Smile 2, or will we just see it for the main character who's like this pop girly, which I do really want to see Smile too, because I think this
yeah,
idea of this woman who is like a pop superstar being followed around by this smiling thing, it's like, and all the parasocial relationships that people have with like celebrities nowadays, and how all of that will play out in the Smile universe, in a
yeah,
Smile context.
yeah.
But that's what I wonder, like, if it presents differently to different people because it's this supernatural thing that ultimately just wants you dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it'd be interesting as well, because obviously I've got no idea, but I don't know whether Cole Gallner turns up in the sequel or anything
I
like
don't
that as
know
well. I
either.
don't know, because I don't know whether they're going to be like, oh, by the way, he offed himself, and now that this is why it's going on. Like, it'd be interesting to see what happens with Smile 2. Obviously, people out there would have seen it by now, and we haven't. So, but after seeing this movie now, it does make me want to see Smile 2, which is a good thing, and we get to that as well. So, and then I think as well, I mean, one of the other things that was weird, but it sort of feels very It Follows in regards to the point where I'm like, I feel like they must have got an idea from It Follows, because obviously It Follows now is obviously a long time ago, long time ago than what I thought, and obviously that is essentially an unstoppable force, an entity that people can't see that's going after them, and there are similarities to this. To what this is, obviously, this is dealing with trauma in a different way. That's dealing with basically, like, don't have sex,
Yeah.
but that's, so it's obviously a different way. But I can't, when I was watching this, I couldn't help but feel that they must have got some form of idea from It Follows or so on. I mean, I could be wrong. This could have been going around Hollywood for like 20 years. I don't know. Um, but I did see the similarities with It Follows in regards to that side of it as well, which also took it back to me where I was like, it lessens that originality. I mean, unfortunately, horror, everything's been done anyway. So it's not easy. I always say this, but it is so difficult. Anyone can make a horror movie. Anyone can make a horror movie. The difficulty is making a good one, and that's the same with every movie. But horror movies out of every genre are the easiest movies to make. But they're not easy to do right. So when we get them, especially in horror, I think that's why films like Smile, people really latch onto them, because there is a rarity. I mean, you can literally just go on Tubi and look on the horror section and just see shit after shit after shit and everything. But then in between all that shit, you're like, oh, there's a really good one. And that just goes to show that there's always like you'll have a page of 100 movies of horror, and you might find 10 or 15 that are good out of that. And that's because there's so many constantly being made, but yet we get very few ones that break the mold of going, okay, we're going to do something a little bit different, or if you have seen this before, we're going to style it in a different way. You know, like I said, like one of the big things for me with this movie is the fact that it's a very well technically crafted movie that has the different layers. Like a lot of movies don't think to have, you know, someone like Rose who's going through what she's going through, and she'll walk out a building, but one side of it's pink and a rose color, one side of it's dark, because the torment that's going on in her mind and the trauma, and she doesn't know which side she's supposed to be on. And that is technical filmmaking that they don't add in so many other movies. So it's always interesting when you get movies like this that are made well on a technical level, but also strike a nerve with an audience when it comes to, you know, the actual story, the arc of the story, and the characters themselves, and so on. Even though they could be played better for me. Um, so one of the things, so obviously we give some overall thoughts on the movie in a minute, and we can go through, like, you know, anything else that we really want to talk about with the movie. I always like to shove some production info and facts in there as well, because I find them interesting, and hopefully everybody else does as well. So the film, like I did mention earlier, is based on Parker Finn's short film Laura Hasn't Slept. Caitlin Stasey, once again, probably wrong, reprises her role as Laura in the feature version of the short as the woman who kills herself in front of Rose. So obviously, you know, people can go out there and watch the short film that's set before it. And it's interesting as well, because when you see the short film, you don't really know where that goes, and then you really, obviously, you know where her story goes in this one as well. So it's quite, I like the fact that they brought her back and connected those sort of dots for
I
her
love
character.
that, actually, because there's
Yeah,
so many shorts that end up getting developed into features, and then it's like whole new cast of characters. So I love that they kept her, and like Laura Can't Sleep is basically the prequel to this
yeah,
film. So I like that connection rather than it just being an inflated version of Laura Can't Sleep. Laura Can't Sleep's the prequel. So I think that's a
yeah.
fun wee detail.
Yeah, and it's cool as well because that character could have just been another person that's like that this is happening to, and it's cool that they were, you know, they were like, okay, well, instead of doing that, we can just have the character that we, you know, that we know, and other people might find quite cool that we've brought her back. The movie had a budget of 17 million, which, you know, in Hollywood standards, obviously that's quite low. You know, with the shitty Marvel movies and all that sort of stuff, of course, like it's quite low. But in regards to a horror movie, 17 million is actually pretty good. So I always say, like, if you're getting 17 million for a horror movie, you're doing all right. But it made 217 million worldwide.
Wow.
So $17 million budget, it made $217 million, you know, worldwide, which is obviously a huge success for a movie like this. I know that they would have spent obviously quite a bit of money with the marketing campaign. One of the things with the marketing campaign, I don't know if you saw it, but they would send people to like baseball games and stuff like that, and then just get them standing up with the smile on their face, and everybody's around them beginning like, what the fuck's going on? Like, who's this mental? And I think that's great. Like, the thing is, you know, you've got to do marketing. You know, Hollywood is, you know, in the last few years, it's really coming around to marketing is so key to create revenue for movies. And if you don't have it, like, because so many movies now are putting like 200 million into a movie, and then on top of that, they're putting they're putting all this money into a movie, but not marketing it properly, and it's only breaking even or not making enough money back. Whereas now they're putting the money into marketing, but then it's going to show that you're making so much money back. So it wouldn't surprise me that if things that they were doing with the marketing for Smile is one of the reasons as to why was such a huge success, because this was a film that started out quite under the radar, right? Like, it wasn't something that when it came out I was just like, Smile, like, that's a film, you know, I need to see. I mean, I didn't, and I'll get into why in a little bit as well. But it wasn't a film that I rushed out to go and see. It was one of those films that when people saw it, I think people really connected with it, and it was a really big success. I mean, you look at things like Longlegs. The marketing campaign for Longlegs was so good that it made people go to the cinema whether they came out of it liking it or not. But the marketing campaign was one of the big reasons why people went and watched it, because they were like, shit, if it's making Michael Monroe's heart beat out of her chest, then maybe it'd do it to me. So it's interesting the way that Hollywood works, especially with horror. But this film was a big success, which is bloody nice. Um, the police statement. Oh yeah, this is a really random one, but I sort of put it in there. The police statement shown around the middle of the movie has a PDF 417 barcode on it. When decoded, it reveals a hidden message. The decoded message says the cache is located at north 36 degrees 06.023 west 115 degrees 01.733. I'm not doing that again. Hint: guardrail. The actual coordinates point to a location in Las Vegas, right near a guardrail. That's pretty much it. But it actually is a location to somewhere, and I don't know whether it was part of like the marketing of the movie or so on. But it was part of something in Las Vegas. God knows why. But some of the nerds out there find these things, and then I read them, and I'm like, I'm just going to put it in here. And then when asked if the smile curse is beatable or is the fight to stop it hopeless, writer and director Parker Finn revealed it's a good question. I like to think that this thing, it sort of enjoys toying with its victims and being as elusive and slippery as possible. I like to think that there probably is a way to beat it, but I don't know. I mean, it's also quite inescapable. So it sort of is leaning on the fact that Parker Finn is saying that it is a real entity, a real manifestation of something, but also he's not giving it away. So he's saying, I want to do as many sequels as I can to try and make some money. It's always funny when they do that. Like recently with Damien Leone, where he's like, I'm only making 4 movies. And then now it's like, if it goes into a 5th, it might have to.
Well, yeah, but I do wonder. I need someone who's very good at maths to like do the maths on the smile entity for how long it would take it to like kill everyone in the world. Because
Oh yeah,
like if it
that's a
takes like
thought.
4 to 7 days and there's what like 7-8 billion people on the planet, I mean it's gonna have to stop at some point.
It's gonna have to, and then it's just got itself, and then it just has to like just live on its own, and then the monster creates its own trauma because the trauma of being alone, and this monster thing is just like,
Yes.
oh shit, what do I do? And it just sits there watching, I don't know, iCarly on repeat. You know, that's death within itself. That's trauma within itself, and then that's it, and that's what happens. So in Smile, I don't know, 82, when we get there, that's when the entity is sitting on a couch, like watching Friends or something for eternity, going, oh, I'm pretty sad now.
So it takes a boat out to North Sentinel Island, but it gets killed by the spears on the boat.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. So there you go. There's some production info, a few facts. And also there was a random one that I noticed where I can't remember where it is, but there's a bit where you see Carl Gallner's photo or his like ID, and it's like happy, but then the next time you see it, it's sad. So there's like a little thing in there as well. So I don't know whether that's depicting the fact that he's definitely going to die. Overall thoughts on the movie. I always let my guests go first. So if there's anything else that obviously we haven't talked about, please do, and give us your sort of overall thoughts on it.
I think overall it is a good like rumination on trauma and how these things affect you, but also the people around you. We're kind of talking during like the party scene about how the actions that happen because of this thing almost create like a spider web of trauma that all kind of leads back to Rose. And we see that Rose had this parent who was probably traumatized herself by her parents or maybe a former partner. It leads her down the path of being with drugs and alcohol, which then traumatizes Rose. and how if you don't deal with these things, it just keeps going on and on and on and on. And even Rosie's therapist says, and I think it is kind of like the point of the film, it's like you have to deal with these things. It's not going to take it away, it's not going to cure you, but you do have to deal with it. And I do think that is quite an important message. Like, I've known people to have quite bad mental health problems, don't deal with them, and basically implode, and eventually they just go off and you just have to watch that happen because they don't want to talk to you anymore, they don't want to deal with it. And it's really hard to watch, and you kind of see that with Rose. Like, she doesn't want to deal with her shit, so everyone around her has to watch her implode and get sicker and sicker and sicker to the point of like suicide. Well, obviously they don't know that there's this supernatural thing happening. So I think Parker Finn has told a really good story about all of that and why it's really important to deal with it and focus on it. I know certainly in the UK and like my workplaces, we do a lot of things about trauma informed practice and how people do act out in certain ways because of traumas, and how it's really important to kind of give a bit of space for that and like talk about that rather than shutting it down and don't do that, don't behave that way because it's not appropriate. It's like, actually, why are you behaving that way? And I'm glad that we're kind of moving on as a society and becoming a bit more open about these things, because it is so much more common than you think to be around someone that's had adverse childhood experiences, experienced a traumatic event. And I think this film does a really good job of showing why we need to make a lot of space for people who have experienced traumatic things and helping them to move on, and helping, giving them the help to help themselves to move on as well.
Yeah, it's this film. So I'll go into this properly in a second, but I think you're right. I think this film does have a message, and even though ultimately this film is a very dark movie or a dark way of looking or perceiving it, it still does have a message of saying, that it is real, that trauma is real, mental health issues is real, and we're depicting it in the movie the way that we are because it's a movie. But we, like I've said throughout this, it doesn't hide that's what it is trying to be or what it's about. That is at the forefront of what this movie is and who Rose is as her character, as a person, and what she's gone through and the trauma. I think that is quite bold for the movie to do that, because ultimately, like I've already said, it's just a movie, and when you get movies that might be able to strike an emotional chord with you or someone, or ultimately might help someone, because that is a positive that you can take from movies like these, where it might make people go, hang on a minute, like that reminds me of how I feel or how I react and so on. That might turn into a positive because it then opens people's eyes to the way that they are. I know I'm guilty for all the worst possible things that people shouldn't be doing with mental health and so on. And there's so much more that I should be doing better for myself. And movies like this is almost shoving it in your face, but not in a bad way. It's shoving it. Obviously, the movie's bad in regards to the way that it is for the characters and what happens to them in the movie. But the message is there, and I do appreciate that when films are bold enough to say, "Look, this is what it is," and there is a message there that might hopefully be a positive one, even though the movie's not necessarily a positive movie. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Sort of. So yeah. So with me, I have made quite a few notes on this because, and I'm going to go through them. I'll go through them as quick as I can because there are. This movie is interesting to me, but I think that it's a very interesting movie, and I still am trying to think about where my level of how much I like this or how much I dislike this movie. because there's a lot of things where it's like pros and cons, like I've spoken throughout it. This film, for me, definitely verges on the border of what I call hipster horrors. They are basically movies where it's essentially if A24 movie fucked a Blumhouse movie, and this is what came out. You know, they are what they class as elevated horrors when they're just boring, long horror movies that nothing really happens. But then ultimately, they're always the depiction of everything that happens in the movie and their endings are always very negative. Nothing ever good comes of these what I call as hipster horrors, things like Hereditary and things like that. You know, they are very pessimistic. There's no real joy of life in these sort of movies. And unfortunately, for me, and that's why I struggle with, and that's why I said I'd come back to it. Films like Smile, they're not movies that I necessarily rush out to go and see because I know that by the end of it, I'm going to be pretty depressed, and I don't. Well, I don't. I'm not somebody that likes to come out. I'm depressed enough as it is. I don't want to come out of a movie that makes me feel worse than it or I already do. So, and you get and horror's at a strange point, and it has been for a while now. And I'm hoping, quite honestly, I'm hoping it comes out of it. And I obviously I don't know what the sequel is like. Yeah, we don't know what the sequel's like. Hopefully, you know, it might be. You know, I hope that it doesn't sort of be as sort of slow paced or as this one is and so on. But the message, like I've said, is there, and to, you know, hopefully it helps people deal with trauma and so on by seeing the lengths or the depths that the trauma has taken this character in the movie and ultimately what happens to her. And hopefully that helps people to go, I don't want to get to that place. And that's a good thing. But in so many of these movies, unfortunately, ultimately, this doesn't end well for Rose. She dies. We're essentially, you know, in my mind, if there wasn't a Smile 2 and we don't know what's happening, Cole Garner's got this thing now and that's going to kill him and the cycle will constantly continue because there's so much trauma in the world. This thing is going to feed, like you were saying, like it's just going to feed forever until there's no one left. And that's sad, and you don't want to think about those sort of things. And that's the problem with horror at the moment, is that there are a lot of movies that are just, there's no optimism and there's no fun, so to speak. Like you take Terrifier, I've already said, but Terrifier 3 is a very dark movie, and there are some very dark things in it. And what we see on the screen of what Art the Clown doing is very dark, but it's not. It doesn't feel like it's draining your soul. Like it doesn't feel like it's something that's making you depressed. If anything, and it does go to show sort of, you know, people might be a little bit, you know, the way that we are as horror fans and so on. We might like these things, but you enjoy those experiences because you sort of like are waiting for the next thing to happen because you're like, I don't know, you're on the edge of your seat because of the experience. With these sort of movies, you're sort of sunken into your seat, and because they make you feel uncomfortable, and that might be what the movies are trying to do. But I don't feel that that's the place where horror should be going. If I'm all honest, that's how I feel.
I know what you mean about the comparison between like the two films, like Terrifier 3, as much as it's got a lot of depraved content, it's
Yeah,
got loads of moments of like, is brevity the right word? Like there's loads of funny moments in it.
yeah, yeah,
When my
yeah,
sister and I saw it at the cinema, we were pissing ourselves laughing, much to
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
chagrin of the people sitting in front of us, might I
Oh yeah,
add.
I'm absolutely the same. Absolutely the same. Yeah,
Whereas like something like Smile, it is dark and it's one of those things that it's giving you a lot to think about. And like I love a bleak ending in a film. Like, you know, when I was watching it at the cinema, like I thought Rose and Joel were gonna get together and that was it, and then obviously we were brought back to the house and then you realise that's not gonna fucking happen and she's gonna die. Um and I was just like, oh, but also like, oh, this is so good because I love dark endings, but I totally get how a film like this like sits heavy in your soul because it is about dark shit and trauma. And Terrifier 3 is also about trauma, but those humorous moments with
yeah.
Art the Clown break that up where there's nothing to break it up here. It's
No,
just trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma,
Yeah,
and
I
something like
I
that does
didn't laugh
sit heavy
once
in your
watching this.
heart.
Yeah,
No.
it does. It's very, and that's a thing, and I find it really difficult to watch movies like this. So you've got like this, you've got obviously the original, I think it's Speak No Evil or whatever it's called. You've got films like older films like Eden Lake. You've got Hereditary. They're not my type of movies. Like I like to have some form of optimism in it, and so on. And that's probably just me, because I just would like to try and have some form of optimism in life, and I want them to have the same. So I struggle sometimes where we are in the space of where we are in this, in this moment in horror where we are now. For me personally, I want us to get out of it, because I don't think that I don't personally think that, even though they're creating very well crafted movies, I don't think it's a positive place to be, because horror isn't always positive in the things that we're seeing, but it's the journey we're on to get to those things we're seeing. For example, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. They're fun movies and you enjoy your time watching them. And there's some horrible, horrible things that happen in them, but you're looking forward to the moments when you get there. And when I watch movies like this, I don't look forward to it. I don't look forward to getting to the next bit, because I know that it's not going to be positive. I know that throughout the whole film, very much like Hereditary and so on, it's just flat out trauma and misery throughout the whole movie. And then you get to the end and there's just more misery and trauma. And I so, and but also, like, I'm really old, so it's so it's like the movies that I was watching when I was a kid and growing up are different to like these movies now, and I think it's a very different audience if you're watching this now, in your teens, or your early adulthood. These are the movies that like you're going to be watching. That these are your starts to horror, and for me personally, it's a bit of a shame that this is where people's journeys are going to start in this modern day of horror, where the films are very bleak and there's not much optimism. I feel sort of I feel we need to get out of that, and I want us to start having fun again in the genre. That's how I feel.
I definitely think there's a place for both. Like, Hereditary is actually one of my favorite films. So
It is for a lot
I
of people.
love that film so much. And I watched like Speak No Evil for the first time recently, and again it's so bleak. Loved it
Yeah,
weirdly. But I also love Terrifier, and I would love to see more fun slashers, because like I'm a big fan of Friday the 13th franchise as well, and those
yeah,
like dumb fun like slashers. Like I want more of those. I love a good horror comedy as well. Things like The Blackening. The Blackening was so funny, that came out last year, the year before. And fun slashers like Terrifier 3, like could definitely would love to see a bit more of that as well. But I don't know if it's a case of like one over the other. Let's just have it all.
yeah. Well, that's a good thing. I think the difficulty is that like horror, like movies like these are the ones that are making money at the box office, because like I said, it's all about the conditioning of where people are when it in regards to age, and them coming out, and these are the movies that they're watching now. And that's my problem, is that I don't know how long this period, because like I mean last month obviously we had our 90s nostalgia November, and that was basically about a couple films from the 90s that no one now like really knows about, doesn't give a fuck about, no one's listened to, and 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 that was a time, a really really weird time in the history of horror, and it's always evolving. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go next, and how this moment in the horror history of these very like bleak, not very optimistic movies, it'd be interesting to see how long that lasts, because me personally, I don't want it to, because I want some fun back, um, but then it just depends on the quality of the movie, and then that's when, getting back to the quality of this movie, I would say personally, like for me, i don't I don't like the movie itself. I think, or I don't. That's wrong to say. I do enjoy the movie. For example, well, do I look forward to watching Smile 2? Yeah, I do. But I think the one of the main reason that I look forward to watching Smile 2 is, for me, the technical journey that you're taking on in Smile outweighs the actual quality of the movie itself in regards to what you're watching. I really enjoy Parker Finn's way of making a movie and the things he has going on in the background to represent character or people and so on. And I think for that to show up in movies and for people to see that, that goes to show that he's obviously a talented filmmaker. I do think he gets a little bit too David Fincher with it and purposely does things that he doesn't need to. Um, because he's like, that would be a cool shot. And you're like, sometimes you've just got to let the people do what they're supposed to on screen rather than doing everything upside down and things like that. Um, but I think he's quite clearly a talented technical filmmaker, and I think that outweighs for me how I feel about the actual movie itself. Apart from its bold representation of trauma, which I do really enjoy. Enjoys the wrong word. I respect the way that it deals with trauma. I do think it takes it too fast or too uh, too obviously supernatural for it to be something that really matters so much. But I do think that it's very bold and it does try and make a statement about trauma and mental health, and that I respect. But I would probably say that I like the movie on a technical aspect rather than the fact that it on a story and a movie aspect. But that's the reason why I would be interested to see Smile 2, to see on a technical level what Parker Finn does, rather than going, I care about the story and the characters. As long as the fact they aren't working like they're on a bloody play or on a stage again, I don't want that crap again. Because that was just too much. I just expecting they at some points they felt like Team America puppets, like just walking in. Like there's the bit where she turns up at her sister's house and then she sort of walks her into that group and then the friend goes, "Oh, you're a psychiatrist," and then they walk out and it's like that's the last bit. Like that's the only time you see them, and it's just like walk stage right, walk stage left, and that I didn't like that, and I was just like, it took me too far out. But like we've mentioned, and like Parker Finn will probably still, it could have been done for a reason, which it definitely wasn't. But he probably will say it is now because we've mentioned it. So yeah, I would say it is definitely where we are. It's a film definitely on it, in this modern moment in horror. I would say it definitely is technically very well crafted, which is my favourite part of it. But I think that the performances let it down in regards to like everything else that happens, apart from Sosie Bacon, obviously, who's absolutely fantastic. She is obviously the lead of this movie for a reason. And I just wanted more unpredictability out of it. When we got those moments, those scenes where it was very unpredictable, I really liked those scenes. Like that scene. Well, we're getting to that now. Do you know what? Fuck it. Favorite scene in the movie. What's your favorite scene in the movie? See if it's the same as mine.
That's such a hard one because there's so many like
Yeah,
standout moments. Um, I don't know if it's my favorite scene, but with like the scene at the party with the cat, and then obviously
yeah,
we see everything with that. But then later on, when she comes back to see the sister, and then you see the nephew looking out the window and watching Rose like have that, like
yeah,
she's just like screaming and swearing and fucking battering the steering wheel, and it's like I think that really like hits home like what the film's about.
yeah, yeah. You're right. That's a good one. I think my favorite scene is. I mean, anybody that listens will probably know and knows the movie, has seen it, will know what my favorite scene is because I've mentioned it throughout all this anyway. But it's the scene with the cat. And I think it's just because that scene and that scene alone is obviously, like I've mentioned a million times, is so unpredictable. Like, well, you know that the cat's going to be in there, but then once that happens, in my mind, it becomes about, okay, I know this is going to happen. So how does this unfold? And it's a really traumatic scene that you're watching, obviously, for for Rose, you then start thinking about, like I mentioned earlier, the trauma of what that's going to lead on to that kid and for that kid's life. But the main thing for me is, once again, it becomes about really, really good filmmaking and really good acting where it works together. Is the moment she falls through the table and her arms are all cut, and it is that absolute guttural scream of pain that you get. That is one of like the best sort of screams I've heard in a movie for a long time. That, there's obviously, look, that's what happens horror. People scream and so on like that. But when you get one that makes you feel what they're feeling, then that is a really, really good performance. But it's also really shot really well, because you've got the shot of the glass and the blood everywhere all over her arms. But it cuts like halfway through her scream. So you get just this burst of like guttural pain and scream, and then it cuts, and then you're on to the next thing. So there's loads of really cool scenes in this movie. There's loads of like little moments where you're like, oh, that's cool. But it's just, for me, like I said, unpredictable horror is always going to be the best for me. And whether it's a whole film or whether it's just one scene, I really like that moment in it where it's multiple little layers to one moment in the movie before it goes off and does loads of shit it doesn't need to. So there's that. So that's the movie. One of the things, obviously, I always do on the show is the segment Your First Time. That is where I reach out to all of you out there, and then basically you send me a DM where you send me over in detail the first horror movie memory you can remember, or you're all fucking lying to me and making it up. But either way, I don't give a shit. I've got something to say. But this one's from Robert Jenkins. He sent it over to me over on Instagram, and he put, I went to the cinema with a couple of friends to see Jeepers Creepers 2, a franchise we no longer really talk about because of the piece of shit director. Look it up. I'm not saying anything to anyone. If people want to know, they need to look it up. And I love Jeepers Creepers. Yeah, that's it. But I was 13 at the time and pretending I wasn't a bit scared of going to watch it, full of a teenage bravado. Anyway, the film finishes, and we catch the bus back home. Halfway home, and all of a sudden, the bus window we were sat at explodes. Me and my two friends covered in glass, and the bus screeched to a stop. It turned out in the end that it was some idiots that had lobbed a brick through the bus window. But I can tell you for sure that until that came to light, I was absolutely crapping myself, thinking that the creeper had attacked our bus and that we were toast.
No way! So there we go. My god!
That's it. What a great little story. What a shame. That's it. And you know what? I bet you now he's probably sitting there going, I wish it was the creeper a little bit. But, well, that's probably me, actually. I don't think anybody else in there wants the actual trauma of seeing a real creeper. Bit like the person who made the movie. So there we go. I always ask my guests, if you can remember, Lindsay, what was your first horror movie memory?
I don't know if this is the first one, but one of my earliest horror memories is we used to have Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, on VHS. And this VHS always really stuck out to me because the cover was pink and all the other ones around it were black. And I remember saying to my mum, I'm like, I want to watch that film. And she'd be like, no, it's a dirty film and you're not allowed to watch it. That's one of your dad's films and it's dirty and you're not allowed to watch it. And obviously when you're told no, you're just I want to watch that film. So I would just go on and on about this pink video that I wanted to watch. And it was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And she eventually gave in and let me watch it. But I'm pretty sure it's a 12A. The way she talked about it, and as I got older and thought back on it, it's not an 18. I don't know why she kept calling it a dirty film. It's really not. But yeah, that's one of my first horrors, Elvira, and I've been obsessed with her ever since.
Absolutely, yeah. Alvara is so good, and I mean, I absolutely love that movie. That's a movie that we watch. My partner's absolutely obsessed with Alvara as well, and she's got a tattoo of Alvara, and we watch it like all the time, every year. That movie, and it's such great. And she's so I don't think she gets enough respect in regards to how good she is as a comedian and her timing and how genuinely like that film's just a fun movie, but she's so good in that movie that I don't think that she gets enough credit for how well she leads that movie with her humor. And obviously it's humor of a part of the past now. Like it's sort of like that's a time where movies like that don't get made anymore. But yeah, that's such a classic movie, and yeah, that's a great one. And obviously, Robert has always been traumatized now by the Creeper. So yeah, big thank you to Robert Jenkins for sending that over. Thank you, obviously, Lindsay, for sharing your one. But now, obviously, we've spoken. Have you? Well, do you know what? Have you got anything else that you want to say about Smile? Obviously, it doesn't matter if you haven't, but if you have, then you can.
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, I think that we've for a film that I didn't like that much. I think well, do you know what? Once again, I'm saying that I don't like it, but it's like one of those movies. Like I can't really say I don't like that much about a movie that I would happily watch again, I suppose. So, yes, I do like this movie. For anybody out there that thinks that I'm shitting on this movie, I'm not. Once again, it's just a constructive conversation about me going what I like about the movie, what I don't. You're always going to get that from me because I'm not just going to say something's good for the sake of saying something's good if it's shit. And this isn't a shit movie because I want to go and watch the sequel, so it can't be that bad. So, although once again, I won't get to the cinema to go and see it, so it will be another one when it comes on streaming. But it has made me want to watch Smile 2 sooner than me just taking my time to watch this. This hipster horror, as I call it. Although it feels a little bit different to a normal hipster horror, I will give it that. But it's made very, very well. But with yourself, Lindsay, now is your time to promote everything that you wanted. Whatever you is that you've got to promote with the Ghoulfriends podcast, go give it a go. Give it a good old promote.
So I host Ghoulfriends podcast, which comes out every other Wednesday, and I have a spooky sleepover with my guests, and we talk about their favorite horror films. And it's a really fun time. Like some films are like quite serious, like this one, and we really get into the guts of it and kind of what it means to us and how it's maybe informed our life and or how it's helped us cope with things. Or sometimes we watch something a bit sillier and just laugh for an hour and a half and just have the best time. So I do that most of the year, and then throughout October and November this year, I've been covering Dragula with one of my really good friends, Sophie. We both love horror, drag, and reality TV so much. So if you want to like hear someone's opinions about Dragula or just kind of I wonder if someone else thinks the same way about me about these drag queens, these drag artists, then come over to Girlfriends because me and Sophie just talk about it all as lovers of drag horror and reality TV.
There we go. That's it. So obviously it's available on all podcast platforms. So everybody, as usual, I always say, make sure that you go and listen to it. Go and support Lindsay. We are all. I say this every episode. We're all on our own journeys, and we make these connections and we have these conversations about something in the world of horror. And I absolutely love doing movies like this. I've had so much fun talking about it and the different avenues of how you see things and how I see things and then how you make me see things differently. And I mean, I doubt I've made you see anything differently because I'm not fucking clever. I'm dumb as fuck. But conversations like these only stem from interesting movies like Smile. We don't talk about all the shit that's on Tubi. We're talking about, a film that has a lot of artistry technically and a lot of artistry in regards to performances, although not all of them, and also a lot of emotion, albeit mostly negative, and nothing really positive comes out of this movie. But it can do, like we've mentioned, for you, if you are somebody out there that deals with trauma, with mental health. You know, like I've said, this puts it all out there, in, like I said, not a positive manner, but hopefully people might be able to take something positive from it. And if it does that, then I'm sure Parker Finn is a very, very happy filmmaker. Or he's really unhappy, like the movie that he's made, because it's not a very happy movie. Um, let's hope not. Although he's probably laughing. It made 217 million, and I'm sure the sequel is going to make a shitload as well. So him and Damien Leone are probably laughing their way to the bank at the moment and living the Vida Loca, fucking sharing hot tubs and shit like that, doing shots in hot tubs. Oh no, that's just me. So there we go. Those were the days. So yeah, make sure everyone, you go and support everything that Lindsay does over the Ghoulfriends podcast. You know, we all love doing this. We all love our journeys that we're being on. One thing, obviously, I always have to do on the show is a quick shout out to my creepazoids over on Patreon. I don't have many, so that's always good to have on the show, because I don't have to like go through a zillion of them. But the people I do have mean the absolute world to me. So I've got the Flicks and Friends podcast. Jamie Burns, aka the Doctor, the Disco Doctor of Death. I've lost my voice. Rob Miller and Leighton Collins. They are the people that are going. They are my creepazoids. They're going above and beyond to help me on my journey. If you want to know a little bit more, not just about my journey and how you can help me on Patreon, anybody out there that creates content, they might have a Patreon. You can help them as well. Just go to patreon.com. Search for the Let's Talk Horror channel, or anybody else out there that has content you enjoy. They might have one, and it just means that you can help us above and beyond on our journeys. And you know, I mean, what bigger motivator there is than people you know, supporting us like that. So it's amazing. It really does mean a lot to me. And also, it's just being the video version. People won't see it if you're listening to it, but obviously you can find the links anyway. If you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, that's a fancy little T-shirt he's got on there, that's merch. That's merch, baby. So if anybody wants any merch, I just want to put out there that I make absolutely $0 from the merch. It is on a website. I'm dumb as fuck. I don't know how to do all these things. So I went to the first website that said it does it for you, and then realized that these shirts that they were doing were so expensive, I had to take my margin down to the absolute lowest so people might actually want to buy them. And now I make nothing on them. But that's not the point. The reason the merch is out there is because it would be so cool if people were out there wearing Let's Talk Horror t-shirts. And I know there are some already, which is fucking mental, and it is amazing, and it blows my world. One of them was in Turkey wearing one, and how fucking cool was that? I think it was Turkey or Greece, one of them. And it means the world to me. So it'll be in the links for the show notes on whatever on audio. It's on video. It'll be on this description. I don't fucking know. Just go and find it. I don't know.
It is a very cool t-shirt for the audio listeners. Like, I have been thinking this whole time, like, that's such a smart t-shirt. And then it's your merch.
That's it. Promo. And on the back, it's got, obviously you can't do, this is what I've been doing, working on a little like sort of like logo thing. I didn't have a good enough name for it. I've called it the Skull Lime, because it's a cross between a skull and a slime. That's a rubbish name. I don't give a fuck. If you've got anything better, message me or put it in the comments of what I should call it. And on the back, there's a Let's Talk Horror logo as well. But I don't give a fuck. People can have them if they want. I don't care. All I care about is being able to have conversations like this. And it's been a long time coming, me watching Smile. I probably should have watched it sooner than what I did, but I have now. So, and I don't give a shit. And I think of it what I think. And it's been bloody great having a conversation with you, Lindsay, all about it. So thank you for coming on the show. Welcome. Thank you for coming into the Creep Zone and talking about Smile with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it, actually.
Good stuff. Good. Well, it's better than saying no. It's a fucking pile of shit and I hated it. That's good. All right. Well, thank you. So thank you once again, Lindsay, for coming on the show. Until next time, everyone, stay creepy fuckers.